Good afternoon and welcome to a study on, or more of a class on, a very informal look at diversity and inclusion for small business. My name's Dante St. James. I'll be presenting this one with you this afternoon, thanks to the Australian Small Business Advisory Services Digital Solutions Program. Let's get underway. A quote here from the founder of Honda, Sachiro Honda, who said, if you hire only those people who you understand, the company will never get people better than you are. Always remember that you often find that the people who you don't like or even understand are one where you find outstanding people. So it's I totally messed up the reading of all that because I was trying to fix up my screen. You get the idea is you never get people better than you in your business unless you look outside who it is you normally like or who you normally understand, to look for someone a bit more diverse with better ideas. Well, not necessarily better ideas, but most certainly new ideas, fresh ideas, and a fresh set of eyes and a fresh approach. This is brought to you by the Business Station and the Australian Small Business Advisory Services Digital Solutions Program. It's an initiative of the Australian government through AusIndustry and brought to you in Western Australia by Business Station, by Regional Development Australia in Brisbane, and Treaty Business Consulting in the Northern Territory. To find out more, you can go to businessstation.com.au/program/ASBAS, and you'll be able to see how you can register for one-to-ones as well as being part of the webinars and ongoing things, at least until the end of June this year, where you can get lots and lots of different details. This will be recorded and presented to the YouTube channel of my own, Dante St. James, my name at the bottom, but also Business Station, the one at the top. So in my channel, you can see about 80 different things that I'm doing myself, but then you also got all the things that Business Station are doing as well. And they're doing a ton of different presentations in lots of different ways and lots of different methods to do with digital solutions, but also when it comes to general business advice as well, and helping you get more out of your small business. So what we're going to cover this afternoon is what inclusion is and what inclusion most certainly is not. I'm just going to turn off my camera now because it's just starting to play up on me. How modern business building and marketing does tend to play the majority, and how that can be a real issue when it comes to working with inclusion and diversity. We'll look at how to bring diversity and inclusion into your marketing mix. And we'll look at diversity thinking when it comes to how you communicate. So let's get underway. A little bit about me. I'm Dante St. James. I work with Facebook's lead trainer program throughout Australia and New Zealand, as also a digital marketing associate and media planning professional. I work, of course, alongside Business Station and Treaty Business Consulting with the ASBAS Digital Solutions Program. I've done a lot of connections through Skull International, which is a tourism operators and travel operators club. I work with the Be Connected, Space Fun Online, and NEIS programs for the Australian government, and also working alongside organisations like Territory Proud and Darwin Pride to consult on a lot of different technology related areas. So inclusion, what is it and what is it definitely not? And this isn't always the most obvious answer for most people. When they find that there is a question around the inclusiveness of their staffing or the inclusiveness of their marketing, they're usually thinking, oh, it's all about black and white. There's a whole other world for this. So inclusion is not about quotas. It's not about setting in place and saying we must hire this many people from a non-English speaking background, or this many people who are visibly different to who the other people in our organization are. It's not about creating token people from specific races or specific backgrounds. And it's not about ignoring merit. It's definitely not about ignoring merit. When you're hiring people to fulfill a quota, but they're not as well qualified as the people who were skipped out on because of that, then that's where quotas are. Now, governments often have to follow quotas because they've got to set a standard for the rest of the country, and they're under very strong union pressure to do these things. In a small business, you don't have to go to quite that level, especially where you're starting to create a situation where you're getting to a point where people are saying you're being too PC, or this crazy PC world that we live in. It's not about quotas. It's not about tokens. It's not about ignoring the merit. It's about something else. And what it is about is recognizing the inherent bias that all people have. Now, for want of calling out particular segments of our community, this is not a white thing. This is not a black thing. This is not an Asian thing. It's not a Muslim thing. It's a human thing. We are naturally biased towards those who speak our language, look like us, think like us, and live lives like ours. It's a natural part of human survival and behavior. But recognizing that is there is the start of decoupling that from being the way we behave. So recognizing that this bias is also bad for business is what inclusion is. It recognizes that if we're only playing to a certain crowd, if we're only appealing to a certain audience, if we're only going for one particular style of person because of the attributes of that person, be it skin color, sexual orientation, choice of religious expression, then we're actually being exclusive. We're not being inclusive, we're being exclusive. And then when we consciously move towards and then beyond bias and then towards inclusion, that is also an inclusive act. Recognizing that we are naturally inclined to be exclusive, and then recognizing that this is also very bad for business. And then thirdly, making sure we are moving very consciously and very deliberately beyond that bias, becoming better than that bias, and then towards a more inclusive way of conducting our businesses and our marketing and all those kinds of things. Now, just a reminder, as we continue on this one, this is a live webinar on Zoom at the moment. So your questions will be answered. Just pop them in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll try and answer those as best I can. If you're watching on YouTube, though, this is going to be presented through the comments down below. So it's, I'm sorry, my camera's not working at the moment, so I was just pointing down, but it's actually in the comments below. Whack your questions in there and we'll be able to answer those either through the business station or my own Dante St. James channel. And also don't forget to subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, because I'd love to be able to get you to see more of these pieces of material for business advice and digital advice as they come up. So why a lack of diversity is bad for business? Why is it that it's so bad for business? Surely if you are targeting towards a certain market and you're very, very tightly targeting that market, that'd be good for business, right? Well, when you target or act in one area of business only, you lack a diversity of ideas. And what that does, it makes you very, very open to competitive pressures from others who are looking at diversity. Now, it's not because diversity is a moral act. We're not talking about this. It's just a mathematical thing. It's just saying that if your competitor is a shop down the road and that shop down the road chooses to appeal to a broader audience of people, they are naturally going to bring in more people because they've opened up their marketing, they've opened up their approach and their ideas, and they've opened up their capabilities to people outside the norm of what they normally used to attract. Now, a perfect example of this would be a shop like Spotlight. Many, many years ago, before there was a Spotlight, before there were shops like Lincraft, it was very much considered that old ladies went to craft shops and they were all white and they were all crotchety and they were all there to only be around people just like themselves. When Australia's ethnic mix started to change, particularly around about the 1950s through to the 1970s, we noticed then that a lot of different kind of crafts and a lot of different kinds of arts were coming through. And in the 80s, we had the rise of some of those larger craft stores. So your Lincraft started to emerge around then. Adairs came around about then as well. And as they started to grow and expand themselves to be able to do a lot more than just a knitting shop or just a crocheting shop or just a cotton bob shop, that they were able to then go, let's look at a greater diversity of crafts and arts that people do. Now, again, not a cultural thing. This is just arts and crafts. Then they were able to bring in people who weren't just knitters. They brought in people who were sewers. They weren't just sewers. They brought in homemakers. They took not just homemakers, but people who wanted to paint. So they went way beyond just that one line of things. They went and said, let's expand and get a bigger crowd in here. And now we've got those big boxes like Lincraft stores and Spotlight stores right around the country, and they're doing great business. The craft world is on fire. Now, because there's a few other ones, smaller craft stores that have come and gone because they couldn't diversify or wouldn't diversify. Now, that's not diversity as far as race or religion or sexual orientation goes. That's just diversity of ideas in a business. When you lack diversity in your business, everyone thinks the same. So therefore, everyone's got the same opinion. And when everyone's got the same opinion, you run the really bad, really huge danger that things are not necessarily going to be right that you'll have that opinion. Just because everyone agrees doesn't mean that it's necessarily the right thing. Everyone agreed that the Nazi Party was great in Germany at the time, but these days we've learned very much so that is not the truth. So when you've got a lack of diversity of opinion coming from different people, from different backgrounds and different experiences, then you're stuck in a rut. You can't sort of think out of that. So you get businesses like the Yellow Pages, which lacked a lot of diversity of people to think about what is possible outside of just a phone book. Because after all, we're making good money out of a phone book right now. So if we don't have to really look for more diverse ideas than that, we'll just keep producing the phone book. Then when the internet and Google happened, it pretty much wiped out their business to the point where the Yellow Pages, there's a lot of towns and cities in Australia now that don't even produce it. And about 80% of all the phone books that are sent out to properties now are put into recycling bins, which is a really, really huge waste of resources for a resource that nobody wants. It's a product that nobody wants, but they're still sticking to that same thing. Though these days, just from the fact that they nearly lost their entire business, going from a $12 billion business to a $360 million business. I know it still sounds like big money, but 12 billion is a lot bigger than 360 million. That lack of diversity of thought of going, this internet thing, we could do something with this. Should be working alongside this Google product rather than just saying, no, people want their paper, they want their pages, they want the Yellow Pages, we'll just continue selling what we've got. That lack of diversity, of course, cost them very, very dearly. So when different investors came in and picked up the Census company that is today, they picked up a very distressed business that is now not about phone books, but it's actually all about selling websites, search engine optimization, and social media campaigns. So it's a very different business today, but it's too little, too late, and Census is far from the person, far apart from the company it used to be. When you have a lack of opinion and a lack of ideas, diversity coming in your company or in your business or even your own small business or even your own thoughts, then you tend to have a bit of a lack of diversity in marketing as well. And a lack of diversity in marketing is quite destructive in a very changing world. Or if you live in a place which is particularly diverse, now I live in Darwin, you wouldn't think that it's really much of a diverse place, but a third of our population is Aboriginal, a third of our population is Caucasian, and a third of our population is from other countries. And in amongst the other countries, there's like 175 different nations represented. So it's a massively diverse population. Australia is not a homogenous country at all. 1 in 4 people who live in Sydney are migrants, first generation migrants. So it's telling you we have quite a diverse population here, even though it doesn't necessarily look like we've got a diverse population. So how do we measure this thing called diversity? How do we then take that into something that we can actually take into our businesses every day and measure it and make sure it's something we're doing if we want to do it? We measure diversity in terms of gender. So if you're in a business which is all about management training and every trainer is male, and you tend to find that everybody who is working in management training areas is male, and then you go out to train males, that you're going to have a very, very set opinion of what management is. It's not going to take into account the other 50% of the population. And I heard a beautiful quote on a television show last night. It's a Chinese proverb, which is women hold up half the sky. And I thought that was an amazing way of looking at it, because that's not reflected in the reality of our business world today. So what we look at is it needs to be a diversity of gender roles within different organizations in order to maintain that you are getting the best out of every gender that's represented. So if you're mainly a male-oriented board, you are sorely lacking the influence of women in that area. And another quote that I heard last year, particularly during around International Women's Day, was women belong everywhere where decisions are being made. And that's absolutely true. Different kinds of humanity belong everywhere where decisions are being made, not only because it's morally correct and just right, but it's also great for business. When you have too many men sitting around a table, you have them making decisions, assuming they know what the thoughts of women are based upon their own experience, usually as white men. Not white bashing here, definitely not man bashing. I am both those things. I am a white male myself, and it's very much a trap that I get falling into, where I often have to seek outside advice. I go to the women in my life, the women in my workplace, the women who I work with, the people from other backgrounds, and say, I know that I'm thinking about this from like such a specific background, but that's not a shared experience to everybody. So if I don't ask other genders into the conversation, I'm not getting a true representation of what the world and my market is out there. Race is one of the very obvious ones, and particularly in the last 12 months, where we've seen horrific race riots happening overseas, in America particularly, seeing all sorts of problems going on in other countries where race has become something which is just such a violent thing. Then we look at it and go, well, you know what? We've got to look at this as not just a race problem, but a lack of willingness of different people from different backgrounds to look outside of their comfort zone. This is not just a white thing. It's not just a black thing. It's not just, we've got a Sikh represented in there too. It's looking at this and going, how do we get diversity of thought without having a diversity of races, backgrounds, and cultures represented there as well? So if you're looking for strong businesses that are appealing to big markets of people, and you want to grow your business beyond just being a little home hobby business, then you really need to understand that not all your customers are going to look, speak, or act like you do. They're not going to necessarily speak the same language as a first language as you do. So going and creating things that are very geared towards a particular homogenous or a particularly sort of very flatline view of what the world is like ignores the fact that a great proportion, and in some cases, the majority proportion of your customer base may not actually relate to what it is you're selling, because they cannot relate to what you're doing with your marketing. And we've got a little bit more I'm going to show you on marketing later, specifically on how it can really be quite insidious in the way that it acts, depending on what your background is. Language is a very easy one to pick on because it's a very obvious one. When people can't understand what you're saying, it makes it very, very difficult for them to understand. But going beyond language, there's also the accent. The watchers of my videos on YouTube, my watchers of videos on my TikToks and my Instagram reels and my YouTube shorts and my Facebook are all basically coming from the fact that they understand me better because I have an Australian accent, and they too are Australian. So they feel more comfortable hearing these words from a fellow Australian accent, which is great. But there's also about 150 different accents across Australia, and mine is a very East Coast metropolitan accent. So it's like a very suburban East Coast city accent. So it's a very generic accent, like America has what they call the Midwest Standard accent, which most people who are on television shows who are not playing a particularly strong, different character, but they're playing a very generic character, have this one kind of accent. In Australia, we have a very similar accent to what I've got. So at the moment, there's different accents that are very, very, very strong. You've got the Ocker accent, you know, hey, gone there, mate. It's very, very, very drawly and very, and then you've got accents which are kind of what we call the inner eastern Melbourne accent, which is all about calling things Melbourne, and it's a very much drawn out and much more open vowels. So that's very close to a lot of British accents. And then you've got a West Coast accent that's very strong in Perth, where Perth and Adelaide are both very much known for their chants, their plants, and their pants, rather than their chants, their plants, and their pants. So it's you've got so many different accents that are represented within Australia, not to mention the languages as well. So when you're presenting something in a kind of language or a tone of language or in a particular style of language that may be very Kath and Kim in the way that it's presented, just know that not everyone's going to relate to that. Even at the time of filming Kath and Kim, even though we all seem to know someone who was like them, we know that most of us weren't like them. They were a caricature of a particular kind of people that we all kind of knew someone who was like them. So language can be an important thing with diversity, particularly when it comes down to who you are appealing to. I'm working at the moment on a website for a business that's running tours and experiences in the Katherine region of the Northern Territory. And they wanted to make sure that their website is very easily translated from English to many other languages using tools such as Google Translate. Now, to do that, it means you'd have to use very plain, simple English in very structured grammar. Short sentences, not too much use of very heavy-handed words, very common words, so they can be very easily translated by AI into something which is in another language that's also readable and pleasurable to read in the other language as well. So understanding that when you're trying to talk too technically, trying to use too much jargon, you're also making it really hard for people who are not reading in English, so reading it through a translation matrix on a browser on the website, that they are having a very poor experience of reading your website. Religion is an obvious one simply because that we can be very irreverent in Australia. The largest, in the 2017 census, there's another one coming up this year, in fact, in the 2017 census, we found that it was the largest segment of religion in Australia is no religion. So not saying atheism, that's a segment all of its own, but people claiming they just do not have a religious belief at all was the largest segment of the population, ahead of Catholicism and then the various Protestant Christian denominations, Islam, and etc., all those other ones, Hindu and Buddhism. So when you look at that, you've got to understand that when you come across with a particular religious attitude on your website or a particular lack of religious attitude, you may be very specifically, not necessarily offending someone, but you could be coming up against what their own belief systems are. Say, for instance, if you're presenting a car yard full of selling family cars with models in bikinis draped all over them, just understand that not all people from all religious backgrounds are going to relate very well to that. So it may be looking at going, are these bikini models actually bringing me good business? Is it good business having bikini models draped all over my cars? Or am I better off doing something which is going to appeal to a far broader lot of people? Now, of course, you're going to get to a point where you get to where the emperor's new clothes, where you try to please all and you end up pleasing nobody. So you end up, in the case of the emperor's new clothes, that fable, that you've got this emperor who wants to impress everyone so much he ends up wearing nothing at all, and then offending everybody. So you don't want to be in the position where you're so wishy-washy that you're not having any kind of impact on your market at all, or you're not having any kind of imprint or any sort of recognition because you're being so generic. But at the same time, once you go out on a very strong limb and you're going to say, I'm going to do this one thing that's very, very different and very controversial, it's very hard to step back from that. So if you're going to step across into something which is going to offend a group of people, be they people of a particular religious persuasion, people of a particular moral code, or people who consider themselves to be of family values, then you've got to understand that once you cross that line, you're probably not going to be forgiven for it. And it's going to be very hard to come back across that line in the end if you wish to. So be very careful when you're going down a path of appealing to or deliberately trying to offend people of certain religious attitudes. Sexual orientation has been definitely in the news, I guess, since 2019 when we went through the marriage equality plebiscite. And this was something which is very dear to my heart because there's so many people. I'm in the LGBTQIA plus community myself. And when we've got friends who desperately have been wanting to get married for so many years because of very, very good reasons, not just for I'm in love, I want to get married, but they're looking at it as very much a, if you're in hospital and someone has to be given the power of attorney or the care plan, then it should be the partner of that person, regardless of whether they are of the same gender or not of the same gender, that gets to help to make that decision. Now, of course, the marriage plebiscite went the way it did, and there is now a degree of marriage equality in Australia. That's fantastic. So what we've got to look at now is that even though that really has not necessarily added extra legitimacy to that particular segment of the population, we've got to understand that that segment of the population does exist. So understanding that, when you do things that are set out to deliberately offend a particular group of people, they will be offended, and there's consequences to that. You may think that there is free speech involved where you say, well, I don't believe in, that's great, but free speech isn't free of responsibility or consequences. If you are free to say whatever you like, but the people who want to then come back to you about that are also free to respond, and they're free to organize boycotts, and they're free to organize problems in your business. Just because you want to have an opinion doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to have no problems because of that opinion. Free speech is not free reign. So just understanding that you can have an opinion about something, but when you very deliberately want to kick someone out of your store because you don't approve of their lifestyle, that's when you're crossing a line. And that's when you're not inviting diversity or any sort of thought of inclusion to your business. Now, inclusion doesn't mean you have to, at Mardi Gras time, start displaying rainbow flags all over your shop front at all. But what it can mean is that ultimately, inclusion is that you will treat a person coming in the door if they're holding their partner's hand and they're of the same sex or the opposite sex the exact same way as each other. There's no difference. There's no special treatment for anyone. That's what inclusion is. Diversity then is saying that you have got this open mind, that you don't have an attitude where you will not hire a gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, asexual, intersex, or other LGBTIQA plus community member because of their status. That's the lack of diversity. Adding diversity is opening up yourself to know that if a person walks in that door to be hired for a job and they are obviously or not so obviously of a particular background, you hire them based upon their fit to your business and also to their relative merit to that job, not based upon who they may or may not wish to sleep with at night. Education is another area which you can add a lot of extra diversity to just by opening yourself up to a lot of different options. In the 90s, it was very much an assumption that you went to university because that will help you get a better job. Then the early 2000s happened. We had a housing boom and we realized that the best paid people ended up being tradies. So in all that, we realized that all those who were going to university and getting a Bachelor of Arts because they were told that they need to get a university degree to get a good job, discovered that actually, no, all their friends who went and got an apprenticeship were already buying houses and cars, whilst the people were struggling through third year of university with none of those things. So it can be very much a case of not having a preconceived notion of the educational standard that someone should have before they walk in the door of your business to either be a customer or to be an employee. So we'll look at the employee side of it first. From the employee perspective, you're looking at then somebody who is applying for your job, and that job could be to be a general assistant in your shop front. Now, whether that person has a degree from University of Sydney or whether they have their school certificate from year 10 is completely irrelevant to what that level of job is going to be. There's no proof that the person with the education is going to be a better worker as a general assistant in a store. So quite obviously, you're looking for the person who's going to be best for the job based upon their experiences, based upon who that person is and their capabilities. Now, that isn't dependent upon a university degree. At the same time, though, if you're hiring a physiotherapist for your multi-health disciplinary clinic, they must be a university educated physiotherapist, right? So you want to be able to make sure that they have a certain level of educational standard. Then where the diversity comes in is where you've got legal practices that only hire legal experts from, or legal graduates who have come from certain universities. They say, well, you went to the University of Sydney, so therefore you are far higher recognized than someone who did law at Charles Darwin University in Darwin. That's saying that somebody is smarter because they went to a fancier university. And that's where educational diversity or lack thereof really causes a danger in a business. When it comes to your customers, though, understand that different people have different levels of education means that your marketing material, your labeling, the way that you talk to people has to be able to be understood by people who have very different levels of education. So someone who you could go to and say, hey, this runs just like a Mustang GT, then that they don't know whether that's, unless they've been educated in cars, they don't know that a Mustang GT is a particular brand of a Ford car with a 5.1 liter engine or something that drinks a lot of fuel but goes really fast. So they're not educated in cars. So talking in the language of cars when they're not educated in cars can be a way that you're not actually representing their educational background. You're representing your education background more than anything else. It can also mean that in the descriptions of sale items, in the labeling and the signage in your shop, in the words of your website. If you're writing to too high a level of education and your product isn't particularly requiring that, then you're locking people out from understanding what it is. When you talk in plain English, you're talking to plain everyday people. So you're making it as easy as possible for not only those who speak perfect English and were educated in English, but have a lower educational standard. But you're also talking very clearly to those people who may have come from an educational background that wasn't in the English language. If you make it plain English, more people can understand it more easily. And like we were saying before with the diversity of language, is that different translation programs like Google Translate can more easily convert that into another option for people to understand. So it can convert it very easily into Mandarin, convert it very easily into Spanish, convert it very easily into Vietnamese without having to work around a lot of in words and terminology and overly technical language that is not really understood by people that don't have a certain particular education level. A psychometric diversity is using things like psychometric examinations and surveys, things like the Myers-Briggs testing, which is the INTJ kind of types, or whether you're an ENTF or something like that, or using things like DISC modeling. So DISC profiling is from the dominance, influence, support, submissive, and what's the C? It's like compliance, that kind of thing. There's a particular set of tests that you run on basic questions and answers that people give, and you get an idea of a personality type. Now, when you're running these kinds of profiles in your business, it can be very, very tempting to peg someone as being just those things. Now, the example I will give is 2 years ago, I did a DISC profiling test, and I came up as being a very strong S type, which is submissive, supportive, someone who's very much a part of the team and working for the team. None of those are bad things at all, but they did not fully take into account what I was like apart from that one area where I filled that out in. In my workplace, I was very much a type S, but in my own business, I was a type D. So people do show up as different kinds of personalities in different kinds of environments. So when you're doing a psychometric test on a group of people to see who's going to come in there, it's very like a lot of people who are wanting to surround themselves with people like themselves will look at these tests as a way of saying, oh good, I'm a C type, I want them to be a C type too, because I will obviously clearly they'll understand me and I'll understand them. The trouble is though, not all your clients, not all your customers are necessarily going to be C types. So when someone walks in the door who is a D type and they seem to walk right all over you and you don't know what's happened, it's quite possible because you haven't been exposed to enough different types of personalities in the business or in your life to be able to adequately deal with a D type, an I type, or an S type when they walk through the door. Likewise, not every customer in every situation is going to be of one sort of flavor of psychometric value. There are going to be many different things at many different times of their lives to many different people. So the ability to surround yourself in your workplace with certain psychometric types. Now, in the case of the workplace I was at, they very much decided that there was a bit of a problem that was too many of us who were S types and not enough people who are influencer types or compliance types. So they knew that they need to watch out for those things or help to develop those skills and thought patterns in the people who worked for the business. So they would then have this ability to go, well, we have a very diverse way of thinking and it all comes together and works together in this one group so that we're able to select to do the very best we can possibly do for a very diverse set of clients. So being able to do that means you're able to put yourself in a position where your workplace, where your thoughts, where your clients can come from any sort of background in the way they think and the kind of personality types they have without any fear of any sort of reprisals or anything that's going to come back to haunt them when they're not really quite sure whether they can actually handle what it is that you are working with. Then there's the cultural backgrounds, understanding that different holidays apply to different people and different ideas come from different cultures as well. So it may be completely suitable for your workplace to wear shorts and singlets, but that may not be culturally appropriate to everybody who's working with you in that business. And it may not be necessarily culturally appropriate to everybody who is a client of your business. I'll use the example of a particular budget hire car place, not the budget hire car place that's called Budget, but it's like let's say an economy car rental place that I dealt with in the past couple of years. This particular car rental place is not offered through the airports, it's not offered through a nice little shop front. It's in a sort of a disgusting, messy mechanical yard in an industrial area of a particular city. So when I went to rent this car from them, because it was one of the cheapest ones to do, and it was a way of, kind of like a rent-a-bomb kind of setup, I went to do that, went there, and there's no sign to indicate where to go in. There's no, here's where the office is. You sort of like wander in, hi, hello, is anyone there? What's going on? This bloke walks out with the thickest ochre accent and in a bad mood, clearly, and he doesn't really deal with people very well, but that's how he makes his money. And he walks out with a singlet, thongs, shorts, swearing on the top of his head, going, what a terrible bloody day he's having. And I'm just going, you know what? I can cope with this because, I'm a person who's walked into a place who feels relatively confident when he walks into places. But if I was of any other kind of person, if I was a less confident person, if I was someone who had not really gotten that used to that casual way of Australian business of often presenting themselves, I would think this was the seventh layer of hell, because I don't know where I'm going. I'm lost when I'm walking into this place. There's no signs to indicate where to go and what to do. I don't know who I'm looking for. There's a guy up the back of the corner of the garage working on a car. Do I go to him? Is there someone in an office? I don't even know where the office is. I just have to sort of fumble around and walk around until I figure out where I'm going. That then creates what we don't call a very culturally sensitive environment. It's not making it very clear where people go and what they do. For me, being a confident middle-aged man walking into a shed like that to encourage someone, I've got the cultural background to know where I'm going, to know what I'm doing, and to understand what I'm going through. Someone from another, particularly a lot of backpackers who come from countries where English is not their first language, they would walk into a place to rent a car from that and they would not know what they're doing. It'd actually be a very anxiety-inducing moment for them, and in some cases quite shocking and not a great introduction to Australia, let alone the city where that was. When it comes to cultural expression and cultural diversity, I think it really helps you to understand that not everyone's going to celebrate the same holidays as you. Whether it's a Jehovah's Witness who doesn't celebrate Christmas, or it's someone from a part of India that celebrates the Holi festival with the coloured powders and the colour runs and all that sort of thing, then that's something which we work into our diversity. I have in previous incarnations of my business worked with people in the Philippines. Now, even though they speak English and they're educated in English and they write in English and they do all these things that we feel like we're very, very closely related to, the reality is that they are still from another culture. They celebrate different holidays, some of the same ones, Christmas, Easter, all those sort of things, but some of them are very different. They have local fiesta days depending on where they're from, and these are very important family events for them. They're used to working 6 days a week, so when we try to force them into a 5-day-a-week job, they feel a little bit lost, whereas we can feel very, very at ease working from home, because in Australia, we tend to live in homes that are bigger than we need. We always have that spare bedroom, or we have room in the garage. When you go to places like the Philippines, they live in small houses that are often not geared to have someone take a room as a work from home office, so that they need to be able to go into work because they're one escape from the 17 people living in a 3-bedroom house that they never get room to themselves, where your idea of having an office is having a spare room in the house with an office set up with your internet connection and all the things you need to work from home. Their idea of working from home is having to basically park themselves on a kitchen table or a kitchen bench or on a coffee table in a lounge room with 12 kids around them and trying to get some work done. So setting up those kind of situations where you go, oh yeah, we're just all going to work from home. Oh yeah, shouldn't you just work from home? Doesn't take into account that different cultures also have different setups of working from home. It may be absolutely horrific to some cultures. The idea that you would work from your living room, a place of sanctuary and a place of peace, it will feel like a somewhat of an insult to their culture, an insult to who they are, to say, oh, just work from home. They're like, well, no, I'm not going to work from home. That's not how it works in my culture. So that's understanding of culture and cultural references can be very important, as well as disability. And this one we see out a lot. It's quite often that we will have situations where we are not creating an environment that's very, very well suited to those who are differently able than ourselves. People who may not be able to move as easily as we do, people who may not be able to see, hear, or feel the same way we do. If someone's blind, then the ability to recognize voices that speak clearly is very important to them. If they're deaf, having visual cues can be very, very important to them in a business. And in a small business, we often forget about these things because we are looking for the cheapest, quickest, easiest way to roll out a business, to roll out a website, to roll out a flyer that we can possibly do. So understanding that not everybody who's going to encounter our website is encountering that website as somebody with eyes, ears, and a tongue that works all in perfect concert. Sometimes you're going to be getting to people who are not going to be able to read things as easily, so that they need very high contrast on a screen. So your black should be black and your white should be white, and it shouldn't be having too many words that are written over the top of, expressive, very full, very, very busy photos, for instance, because it makes it very hard for people to read that if they are vision impaired. In the case of hearing disabilities, when you've got a lot of things that require you to listen for the instructions, or you have to listen to a podcast in order to be able to enter a prize pool, or if you need to be able to get on the phone and call us and tell us the code, that is not going to be very helpful to someone who has a speech impediment, where the speech is actually a very difficult thing and maybe coupled with a hearing impairment as well. So again, we're not saying you have to think of every single little thing and then, gauge your business towards every kind of human that says possibly there. It's about reducing the barriers of entry to people who are different to yourself. So it's not rewriting an entire website to go, everything has to be written in such a way that a 5-year-old can understand it, even though that could actually be quite helpful. It's about looking at it and going, what are the few things that I could do differently that may make a difference to somebody who is of a different level of ability, a different culture, a different background, a different language grouping that I'm from, to understand what it is I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to sell and how I may solve some of the problems that they have in their life. Age is an obvious one when it comes to employment. There is definitely a thing called ageism. I'm going to just put it out there, is that I was recently excluded from a particular business network presenting their business there. I was originally approached, and then the time came up for that particular business network for me to be part of it. And then suddenly that thing wasn't available to me anymore. Someone else was called in. Now, it just made a difference. That person who was called in my place was a younger, skinnier, beautiful woman who was brought in there. And it just so happens that this particular business network is full of younger, slimmer, beautiful white women. And very, very strangely and very, I guess by coincidence or by design, this particular network only ever seems to have speakers who are very young, very thin, white women are all their speakers. So it's a very interesting thing that I got blocked out, I believe, based on both age and weight. I'm not skinny by any stretch of the imagination. I'm certainly not young, and I'm not someone who is a model, but they seem to, everyone they work with is beautiful and in a very generic white standard way. And I just found that, you know what, I don't really want to be part of that particular group. But if I wanted to take that further, there is a case to be made for that particular group being extremely exclusive, only for a certain segment of the population. Now, of course, their events go very well, but they've kind of reached their limit. when everybody in that room is just like you, everyone looks the same. So everyone's starting to dress skimpier, and everyone's trying to stand out that little bit more by having bigger hair and bigger teeth and whiter hair and a hotter boyfriend. And it's actually quite a sad little network that's going on. I've got a little bit of a mention of that particular network a little bit later on as well. So ageism is alive and well. And then also ensuring, when you've got all of your models in all of your material and for marketing on your social media, and they're all 22 and skinny and white and happy with big, clean, beautiful white teeth, then it's starting to make people feel that they don't fit in and they can't relate to it, because these people look nothing like them. And in fact, there's such a difference between them and what your models look like, that it actually makes your business look like you're very, very, you're very exclusionary. But the marketing world we live in plays to the majority. Marketing absolutely does perpetuate inequality and prevents inclusion as well. And even at times in my life, I've been guilty of making it a little bit more difficult for marketers to be inclusive. Now, after a quick scroll through Facebook this morning, or very recently, I discovered that the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 first ads that I saw as I scrolled through Facebook all featured young or relatively young white people. A white guy with his hair, a white guy in a gym, a white girl at a computer, a white guy with a camera, and another white guy who was presenting a particular masterclass at an innovation symposium. Now, this is not that unusual, considering that I am a white man myself. So a lot of this marketing is geared towards me, based upon the psychological concept that like attracts like. The idea that if I see people who look like me, who speak like me, who act like me, I'm much more likely to feel included with this. So as I scroll through, and this is something you'll notice yourself, as you start to scroll through your Facebook, you start to scroll through wherever there's ads, you start to see patterns developing, particularly on those platforms that target their ads towards particular kinds of people. So I look at me and go, well, I'm starting to get older and I've lost my hair. So getting a wig that would sit over my hair and make me look younger would be great. I'm overweight. So deliver someone who's kind of good looking and owns a gym and kind of would look like I did if I was younger and had more hair and spent more time at the gym would be quite appealing to me. So these kind of ads were what were flicking through Facebook. But then there's this group of people in a particular part of Darwin where I am, which run events, that that you start to flick through all of their photos and you see that everyone kind of looks the same. Young, slim, beautiful women with the occasional guy who's in there, but everyone pretty much looks the same. Now, look through all those photos, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 photos that are on display, and only one of those photos is showing anybody who has skin that I could be even vaguely looking at and saying it's not white. And I think she might just have a tan. So it's very, very different. This is a very exclusive group of people who gather in Darwin to a group of events called Belong. You clearly don't belong unless you look a certain way in these particular events. And they're very much designed for that kind of person who looks like that and wants to be around other people who look like that as well. So the danger in there is that these kind of groups, they tend to collapse in on themselves because they become so boring and so repetitive and so much of the same people competing with the same people for attention every time, that it becomes something which doesn't actually add any value to the people who are members of that community or attendees to those events, because they're just seeing the same people all the time and nothing ever seems to be very different. But you may claim though, but that's my target market, that's my target customer. Your target customer may be represented in those photos, but that's not your only target customer. And you may very well be leaving a big amount of money on the table when you're only targeting that one particular customer. You may say, I know this is my customer and I know my customer and this is definitely them. So the problem is though, when you get to the point where you've exhausted that group of people, especially if you're in a regional town or you're going for a very niche crowd of people, you're going to exhaust your market very quickly and you're not going to be able to grow any further. You're backing yourself into a corner. Oh, but this is a business. I'm not an activist. No one's suggesting that you lose money. No one's suggesting that you put your neck out and try to become an activist. We're just saying that there is a way to find money in your business, it goes beyond who your core target customer is. If your target customer is 35-year-old fitness freaks who are mums who are busy and generally white and speak English, then you may be leaving behind the other, people in the crowd who also have money to spend on exactly what you're selling, but may not fit your core audience. So what can you actually do about this to make a difference and to be able to be more inclusive? Well, it comes down to things like the photos you take. If you're only taking photos of your family and friends, and we tend to be only family and friends with the people who look, sound, and act like us, then we find that we're only surrounding ourselves with certain people. We're only promoting ourselves with certain kinds of people. So what it might be a more homogenous photo of 3 girls sitting around who are all skinny, all gorgeous, and all laughing and having a fun time, is a lot less inclusive than, say, a more diverse audience of people from a couple of different racial backgrounds, different genders, and different levels of attractiveness. Even though they're all quite young, they are all still a lot more diverse image. They're showing that there's a lot more in there than just skinny white girls. Now, this one can be a little bit one that comes down. People just go, but yeah, I should be able to show my flag and be proud and patriotic. Yeah, you should be, and you can be, but just realize though, that when you're showing images with flags, as opposed to, this example where it's like a map pin in a place, it's saying the same thing, but it's just not displaying something which could be rather divisive to someone. Aboriginal Australians do not, by and large, relate well to the Australian flag. People who are from other countries who may have had a problem, particularly with the British, they may not relate particularly well to our flag. And you may say, oh, well, then they should just get used to it, and they should just, they should integrate. If they love it, or they can love it, or they can leave. That's a really very exclusive thing to say. When you're trying to expand your market to people who are outside of just the people who you know and you like and you're used to, then you need to understand that there's going to come a time when you need to express your business in a way that appeals to more people from different diverse backgrounds. We're not saying don't be proud of your country. We're not saying don't display the Australian flag. We're just saying think about it before you display that particular thing, before you start posting about Happy Australia Day, before you start posting about particular celebrations that are very excluding of certain people. Understand that there may be some kind of consequence to that. So understand that sometimes things are not going to land the way you thought they may land, because they're going to a more diverse set of population. In the Northern Territory particularly, we get this a lot, where people like to appropriate the culture of particularly Indigenous Australians, paintings, art, that kind of thing, in order to show that they're local and they're diverse and that they're somehow doing the right thing by Indigenous Australia. The problem is they've taken paintings, pictures, and things from people that are just they were not actually part of that original culture. They've just become a stereotype of that culture, and they're then used to what we call blackwash situations, or to blackwash a workplace into thinking this is a lot more culturally diverse than what it actually is. You see it in things like, for instance, the background of a website, showing an Aboriginal painting that hasn't been credited to any one particular artist, but we know the fact that an artist sometime, somewhere, actually created that painting. So when you're going through images on things like Canva, particularly, and you're trying to do your backgrounds of websites and social media posts and all that kind of thing, understand how to think about what the photos are you're putting in there. Which also brings us further into Canva, because there's algorithms in Canva and in other situations, other systems that gear towards very stock standard Western European rules about what's attractive. So if I type in handsome man to the Canva search for images, I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 white men in a row they're all slim or muscular. They're all very square jawed. They're all what we would call very standard white man, good looking. Then I look for beautiful woman, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 11 of those 12 are white women from Europe. And the third one looks like she may possibly be from a Middle Eastern background. but that may also just be because she's got a headband on that makes it look like she's got a hijab. She may not actually have a hijab on. So again, you're seeing a very generically presented version of what a beautiful woman is as you're getting with a handsome man. This doesn't just stop with looks. It also goes into the kinds of stock photos. All of these stock photos are available on Canva. So when we look at what gender stereotyping, if you look for cleaning or housework on Canva, you get majority of women doing the housework. Now, that may actually be very representative of what really happens in the real world, unfortunately. In a lot of families, we still find that women are carrying far beyond what is the accepted half and half of what the relationship would be. Yet when this is perpetuated through things like stock photos and that, you're starting to see that there's a bit of a problem. It's like a self-perpetuating prophecy of, okay, we're going to advertise the fact that it's mostly women doing the housework. Therefore, women will continue to mostly do the housework because that will become very normalized. There's also gender stereotyping in men. You look for mechanic or farmer in the photos on Canva, and what are you presented with? Man hands, men, male farmers, men with hats, men with spanners. It's all men, because mechanics and farmers apparently can only be men. So you see the thing in reverse. There's stereotyping of women and stereotyping of men. And these are just the quick, simple searches for stock photos in a program like Canva. So mind you, this is Canva, which is a business that's owned and operated by a woman, an Australian woman. So you'd think they'd probably do a little bit better at this. And they do have some really good times when they actually put forward especially during Black Lives Matter and during International Women's Day, had a lot of really good clip art and elements that you could put in there. But their photos are still coming from stock photo sources that are very, very geared towards existing stereotypes. If you're in doubt, leave the people out. That's what I would always say. So make sure that you then leave the people out of the photo. You don't have to throw the baby out of the bathwater. You don't have to have no white people in your ad or no people that from your background or no young, beautiful people at all. You can use those things as well. Just don't use it in everything. Just mix it up a little bit. And you can have diversity in your communication by following these 3 simple steps. Number 1, do everything in simple language, delivered as clearly as you possibly can without needing interpretation. Use things like high contrast, a mix of upper and lowercase rather than all uppercase. Leave your stuff left aligned because it's easier for the Roman alphabet to be read from left to right when it's not then in strange alignments. Use dot points to make the points easier to read. And then on presentations like this one, for instance, make sure you don't have anything less than a 30-point size font in those presentations. Otherwise, it becomes very unreadable. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. It's a bit of a biblical precept, that one. But the idea is that if you need to say yes to someone or no to someone, just say yes or no. Don't attempt to try and add a story to it. Yes, but, or no, but. It just has to be yes and no. A little bit of diversity statistics we'll put in as we start to look this one up. How Australia stacks up with this sort of stuff. 72% of people speak only English at home, but 38% don't. 38% actually speak other languages at home in addition to English. 28% of Australians are between 25 and 44, but 62% of all advertising is aimed at that demographic between 25 and 44. That's really interesting. 72% of all marketing is aimed at women, yet only 38% of all the wealth is held by women. 78% of Australians who are regarded as Caucasian in appearance, yet 92% of people on Australian TV shows, news, all that are Caucasian. So get that, 78%, less than 80% are regarded as being Caucasian in appearance, but they represent 92% of the actors on television today in Australia. Diversity and inclusion are very good for business. It just takes a little thought before you post that little image on Facebook or you record that podcast or start that live video to remember that you could be talking to people from very diverse backgrounds in different places. If you'd like to talk more about diversity and inclusion, feel free to reach out to me, dante@treaty.com.au, or you can reach out through my website or the various places where I live on Facebook and LinkedIn and whatnot. And if you really would like to go into how you can then take your website particularly and your social media into a more diverse place, then I'd love to invite you to take advantage of a free ASBAS digital solution consultation session with me for an hour. If you've never had one before, it is free. If you've had one before, it'll be $66 including GST. You can do that through businessstation.com.au. Thank you very much for your attention and being able to be part of this. I'll see if that video now works again. Yeah, it is. Hi there. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I hope you enjoyed that. If you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe and like this one, because we want to get more people to be able to see this stuff and learn more about how to spend time working on their business rather than just getting busy in their business. Have a great afternoon and week.